A good Erev Shabbos, everyone. Erev Shabbos, Parshas Bahaloscha. Exciting things in the Parsha. One of the most exciting things in the Parsha is the section that says Vayi Soaron, that it was when the Soaron moved, we offered a tefillah of Nucha Yomer, and then when it rested, Shuv Hashem Rivas Alfa Yisrael, that Hashem should return the myriads of the Jewish people. And if you look at the beginning and at the end of that section, there are two upside down nuns. Marks in the Torah which never appear in any other place. Whether that's considered hefsek, whether it's considered extra letters written in the Torah, that's a debate amongst the later authorities. But at the end of the day, that's the custom that we make these two upside down nuns. The Gemara says that there are signs, whether it was the upside down nuns that it's talking about or not doesn't really matter, but that we make signs. God made signs by setting this parsha, this section of Vayi Soa, setting it apart. And he set it apart because this is not its place. It really belongs somewhere else in the Torah. And why did he put it here? The Gemara explains that the reason that it was put here in between these sections of the Torah is to be mafsik, to make a separation between puranis and puranis, between one punishment and another. And if we look carefully at the parsha, we'll see that there were actually three punishments, three terrible tragedies that happened. The second and the third are easy to identify because they're about complaining and about the food that we were eating and complaining about that food and about a fire that consumed the Jewish people and the punishment that came after that. But the first punishment is a little bit difficult. So rabbis identified that what was the first punishment? The first punishment is from the words that they left the mountain of God. When it says Vayisu me'ar Hashem derech shloshis yomim, v'aron bris Hashem nosei lifneim derech shloshis yomim lasur lehem menucha. So rabbis explained that what was the problem of leaving Har Sinai? The problem was they left Ketinuk Abarech and Beis Sefer. Like now, close to summertime, you see this parsha is read always. We have this great image in our minds because we know it. We see them running out of school the last day when the bell rings, how they tear out of school. And that's the way we left. That's the way we left Har Sinai. We left Ketinuk Abarech min Beis Sefer, like a child that was running out of the Beis Sefer, and therefore says the Gemara that in order to be able to be mafsik bein puranis rishon and puranis shniya, in order to be able to be mafsik between the tragedies and between the punishments, to separate between them. So therefore we read this section. Beautiful. A few small problems. First of all, puranis means punishments. So I understand the second and the third are punishments. But the first, what's the punishment? It's the crime that we ran away from Har Sinai, like a child running away from a school. But there's no punishment there. There's no indication in the Torah there was any kind of punishment for that. And if we're separating between punishment number one and punishment number two, why not separate between punishment number two and punishment number three? What's the reason that we're separating? You don't want to read them together? Look at the parshas of the Tochacha. We read all that stuff one right after the other. The curses, we read them out, verse after verse after verse after verse. What are we afraid of? Some heebie-jeebie kind of jinxy thing is going to happen, that if you read psukim together, string them together, something's going to happen? And why do we separate this with nuns? Could put little olives, could put little X's, could put a skull and crossbones. Why are you putting two nuns on either side of this parsha? And then the rabbis in the same piece of Talmud say that the reason that we set this apart is because it's a Sefer Bifnei Atzmah. It's a book on its own. Book of the Torah, it's on its own. And there's really 7 books of the Torah, not 5 books of the Torah. Because this is separated from the rest of the book of Devarim. So Bamidbar, so you have Bamidbar, the first part, until here, chapter 10. And then you have these 2 psukim, is the 6th book of the Torah, is the 5th book of the Torah. Then you have the rest of Bamidbar, the 6th book of the Torah, and then Devarim, which is the 7th book of the Torah. What constitutes this as a separate book of the Torah? And why is this the thing that you're separating between Puranis and Puranis, between the one punishment and the other punishment? What's the message? Vayi bin Soaron, when the Aron is traveling. So what's that doing? What's that doing? Moshe says, Kuma Hashem v'yafutzu eidecha. What enemies are we talking about? Send your enemies away, v'yusum esanechem and panecha. People that hate you, get rid of them. What's going on here? So I'm going to tell you very simply. Very simply, the problem of leaving Har Sinai, Ketina Kabareach Mebeis HaSefer, is that we didn't stop to consider that, you know what? This is a fabulous place. It's a place where we're growing. It's a place where we're learning. We didn't stop to consider what happened the year before, when we were directionless and we had gotten smitten by Amalek. We didn't stop to consider and to feel the sense of connection to the place. And we left with a smile. We left Ketina Kabareach and Beis HaSefer with an energy and with an excitement and with enthusiasm of where we're going now, not realizing the tragedy of what we're leaving behind us. And what happens when you cut yourself off, when you don't feel the geschmack, you don't feel that enjoyment, you don't see that purpose of the things that you're involved in. You take a nosedive. And then you go and you complain about the mun, and you complain about the food, and you want meat. And you go and you dissolve. Because as long as you can appreciate where you are and you can appreciate what you're in and what you're involved in, so that everything, you're colored in the eyes that are beautiful, and you're looking at everything and you're saying, this is amazing. But when you disconnect yourself from that, you have no filter, you have no way to see things, you have no backdrop. And you end up collapsing. But that's not just a crime. That's the punishment itself. The punishment is what comes from the fact that you feel disconnected and that you feel disenchanted and you feel disengaged. That feeling of disengagement is itself the greatest sorrow, the greatest piranhas. It's the greatest punishment. And it brings with it crazy things. It makes you cry over lousy food. You imagine? Whenever I've gone to visit Auschwitz, and I've been with groups, always point out, the last thing you want to say now is, I'm hungry. When you put things in perspective and you realize what they were going through, you look at yourself and you say, no, so I don't have food. Big deal. Big deal. It's a little cold. I've gone in the wintertime to Auschwitz. Oh, it's gefährlich. Can't complain about the cold. Let's put things in perspective. But when you lose perspective, you can stand there and you can complain about watermelon and fish. We remember the good stuff that we used to eat. Good stuff. What are you talking about? You were slaves, but you become perverted. You become distorted because you become disconnected. So the Torah comes along and puts those two nuns there and says, stop. You're falling down. You're disconnecting yourself. Danger is on the way. Nun is the letter of Nephila. It's the letter of falling. That's why it's not in the Ashrei. And therefore you have to stop and consider and realize, where am I going with this? And the Torah is not just telling us, as the Gemara says, that when we read it, we have to separate between Puranius and Puranius, but it's giving us an instruction for life. Lahafsik bein Puranius Rishona lePuranius Shniya. That you have to make a stop, you have to make a break, you have to arrest yourself. Because otherwise you're going to collapse and you're going to go too far. You're going to dissolve completely. When you recognize your disconnection, when you're listening, you're listing, you're missing the energy, you're schlepping through the mitzvahs. Everything is a drudgery. You don't realize the geschmack and everything. The grass is always greener on the other side. If I was only doing that, it would be so much better. When you hit that place, says the Torah, you're in a nun. You're in a nefila. It's upside down. World is turning under. Stop. Be mafsik, not after the second and the third, but be mafsik after the first. And how do you reset? You reset by focusing. Vayi bin Soaron, when your life is in flux and it's moving. So then, Vayomer Moshe, remind yourself that Moshe says, Kum Hashem v'yafutzu eivecha. That Moshe Rabbeinu asked God to get rid of the klipas, get rid of those things that are dragging us down. Daven. Ask Hashem to give you back the geschmack, to give you the ability to be able to see the joy. Uvnucha, when it settles down, then you should say, Shuva Hashem Riva Vasafi Yisrael. Connect me back with the rest of the Jewish people. Put me back to where I was. Put me back to my feeling that I belong to this people, and I belong to this nation, and I belong to this Torah, and this is where my life is coming from. I think it's perhaps even telling us a little further that whenever you start to fall, whenever you start to disconnect yourself from the source, you're like a tinik aberech min beis hasefer. Just know one thing. You're not going to get too far. Or you could fall, you could dissolve. Bad things could happen. You could end up doing stupidities. But at the end of the day, Shuva Hashem Riva Safi Yisrael. You're coming back. Because you can't get rid of this. You can't divest yourself of this. You can become as disenchanted as you want, but at the end of the day, you're bouncing back. Because that's the way HaKadosh Baruch Hu created the system. And this message has to stand on its own. It's a Sefer Bifnei Atzmah. That as long as you can find some place inside of you to recognize that source, that you can recognize Kum Hashem, then you don't have to worry. Shuv Hashem Riv V'Safi Yisrael. We're living through that time now. We are in a generation that is so far away. And we're watching sparks here, especially in Eretz Yisrael, get reignited. Get reignited and returned on and reattached back to the river V'Safi Yisrael. But the message that the Torah is sending us, Yoimar, say it, daven it, ask for it. Because then it becomes a reality and a possibility. When you find yourself dissolving, stop. Don't fall any further. Recognize the reality and daven for the assistance to get rid of those shells, those pieces, those blockages that aren't allowing you to feel what you want to feel. And keep yourself attached to your people. That's the power of this section of the Torah. Have a beautiful, amazing, awesome, wonderful Shabbos.